It's February 11th, 2021. This is Roqe. In the context of contemporary Iran, are human rights and any semblance of gender equality even attainable at all under this Islamic Republic, or is the only hope to be found in complete overthrow of the regime? And what can we learn from the history of activism in Iran over the last century to instruct us on how change may come? Iranian-American historian and author Nayereh Tohidi, the founding director of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies at California State University, joins me for a feature conversation coming up. Plus, Kian is here with a new edition of It's All Persian to Us, and Chef Haas is back with Hoss-pitality. This is Conversations from, to, and about the Iranian diaspora. I'm Jian Ghomeshi. This is Roqe. Hi there, welcome to episode number 84 of Roqe 84 in Farsi. Kian.
Your Farsi is getting better.
I'm trying to help you. Hope you are keeping well wherever you are tuning in from around the world. Salam دوستان عزیز. امیدوار هستم که خوب و قبراق.
What does this hideous
They're
word
laughing
mean?
because I was practicing that word just before we hit the airwaves. I barely even know what it means. It means like kind of sharp. I hope you're mizun.
Yes.
Qebraq.
Yes.
Hey, qebraq. Professor Nayereh Tohidi coming up. She's a brilliant academic and historian who's spent basically a lifetime working on issues of equality, gender, human rights in the context of the last century in Iran. I'm really looking forward to as comprehensive a conversation as we could have in one show, one interview about whether human rights and gender equity can actually be achieved in any real way under the current Islamic regime in Iran. And if not, what value is there to incremental progress that may be made in the meantime? Lots to ask her. She's coming up in just a little while. Nayereh Tohidi. Hello, the fabulous Kian.
Hello, Jian.
You have your colo cap on.
Yes, I do.
Again, you mean business. When you put that baseball cap on.
I put it on. I'm coming from a bike ride indoors, of course.
Right.
I just got a bike, so.
You got another bike?
I got a new bike.
How many bikes does one girl need?
No, listen, I was waiting for the gyms to open. I was like, okay, enough is enough. They're never going to open.
So in the meantime, you thought you would buy new bicycles for yourself.
I bought new weights, bicycle, pull-up. I just bought a whole new
Do you bike
gym.
in the middle of the winter?
Indoors, like the indoor stationary bike.
Yes, I see.
Yes.
You got an exercise bike.
And I throw on my high heels to secure my foot into
That's right. That the Persian men invented. Hello, Groovy Shaya.
Hello.
And hello, Captain Reza, the birthday boy.
Here right now. Oh my God.
Thank you, Shaya. Thank you, yes. Shai was so funny. It was pulling teeth to get him to play that version. He was like, I found an alternative version of the song that has musical jazz. And I was like, no, Shai, just play the one that we have at Mahmouni's that we can clap to.
Thanks so much.
Happy birthday.
Thanks, buddy.
Happy birthday. Of course, we know it's your birthday because our lobby is filled with about 200 balloons that your girlfriend sent over here.
He's doing something right if he's getting that big show of display.
There's flowers, there's balloons. I mean, there's a pedicure happening in the lobby. I don't know.
Gender roles for you.
Play the song again, Shaya.
Oh my God.
Here we go.
Wow.
Let this be a lesson to the non-Iranians.
Yeah. Is that my theme song now?
That's right. It's your theme song for today. Actually, your birthday was yesterday, wasn't it?
Yesterday, yeah, it was. But we didn't have a show yesterday.
People who were keenly tuning in for Dr. Nayereh Tohidi have already given up on the show.
It gets better, trust me.
Why are they playing that over and over again? By the way, who was that written by, Kian?
Andy?
No.
No.
You're a rook.
No. What's his name? Come on. He doesn't get recognition.
We had his son. No. It wasn't written by Farid Zalon.
Oh, no.
We had the writer of this iconic Happy Birthday. We had his son on the show.
Come on, guys.
You had Reza, right?
Yes,
Reza?
Reza's the son. What's his father's name?
But what was his last
Reza
name?
Rohani.
Reza Rohani.
And his father is?
No, Shiravan.
No, the full name, Kia, not just Shiravan.
I didn't know I was signing up for a
Anu
pop
Shiravan.
quiz today.
Yeah, sorry. I won't quiz you about things that have been on the show, which you work on and sit here
I'm
and listen to.
bad with names.
Right.
This is, by the way, the best birthday ever so far. Like attacking Keon and.
Thanks a lot, man.
Oh my God, the song again.
I have a jazz version of this from the 1970s, done by some jazz musician.
Wow.
We are on a nice moves, Keon. Nice moves.
I was gonna ask, Reza, is it still your best birthday yet? Are you sure about
So
that?
far,
I think
pretty
it's your
great.
worst
I
at
gotta
this point.
We're on an ongoing mission to build a new audiovisual encyclopedia of Iranian diaspora identity. Depending on where you're listening to us, let us let you know that we're coming to you on SoundCloud. That's an option. Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Castbox, and Telegram. And we have just launched our Patron Circle. So this is we're doing this in an attempt to keep the lights on, keep the show growing, and do our best to satisfy our mission that we've put out there of building this project of Iranian diaspora identity, and we don't want the show to descend into just a bunch of a series of advertisements. So we started a Patron Circle where people can help out by becoming a patron of Roqe and give us some, a donation that is a monthly donation. I've become kind of obsessed with the patrons and hoping that we get patrons on board and like judging my friends based on whether they feel like we only just launched it, right? So I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday, this is a true story, and asking her, I was like, oh, hey, have you become a patron of Roqe yet? And she was like, oh yeah, totally, I'm a big fan. I'm like, no, but did you become a patron? And she's like, no, I listened to every show. I subscribed. And
that's not enough.
And I'm like, well, I never.
What kind of friend
you mean you haven't signed up for $10 a month? Yeah, so I shamed her into. I have to check the list and see whether she's become a patron or not.
And this is our way not to sell our souls to a big network. We want to remain as authentic as possible.
Absolutely,
so this is the only way to do it.
Actually, truth be told, we even had networks sniffing around to license Roqe, and we said no, we're doing this independently. So if you like what we do and you enjoy the content, and if we promise to never play that Tavallud song again, please sign up for our Patron Circle. You go to roqemedia.com. roqemedia.com. It says support us up there, a red button. You hit that, and you can become a friend for $5 a month, BFF for $10, Idol $50 a month. You become a rock star, $100 a hero, and $250 a month a legend. And I didn't mention this before. Thoughtful Negin was saying you got to tell them what they get. So because Thoughtful Negin, obviously she's thoughtful. She thinks of these things, right? Just like Savvy Roham is savvy.
That's right.
See Savvy Roham in the background there. Thoughtful Negin said, tell people what they get, because they're not just helping us out, but we have this quid pro quo. So for $50, you get access to Roqe events, our newsletter, special things we'll only offer online to the patrons at that level or more, and the satisfaction, of course, knowing you support us and our community. But you also get merchandise. This was... I didn't actually, I don't know how this got greenlit, but at the Rockstar level, at the $50 a month level, you get a Roqe mask, get all that stuff, a Roqe mask, and a Roqe hoodie. And the hoodies are amazing. I mean, Shai has seen them. They're like really beautifully made. They're good quality. They've got this like beautiful Roqe design with lots of colors and everything. So I was saying that, like, Thoughtful Negin, how much does it cost us to make these hoodies? And she was like, each is about $50. Like, so then we got to send these, like, we're losing money.
Yep.
I don't understand how this happened, you know?
At the end, it works out. Don't worry about it.
It's so Irani.
It is a great gift idea, though, might I add.
What is that?
Well, the hoodies or
Right.
merchandise in general. Well, that with Valentine's Day coming up, I mean,
That's
what better way
right.
to say I love you with a Roqe sweater? There's nothing.
Absolutely. There's nothing that says, but you know, so anyway, if you become a patron, you get these things. The heroes and legends get this special Roqe bracelet that is beautiful. It's a design. We're going to put it on our site so you can see it if you go to the patrons page. But you know, you don't have to, you know, at whatever level. I mean, for friends out there, and you know, even $5 a month, anything like that helps us. Our latest rock star, by the way, a woman named Rahele Sarbaziha.
I think so, yeah.
Rahele. Anyway, she's better known as Dr. Roqe. She is a young doctor of integrative aesthetics. She has clinics in Beverly Hills, in Soho, in New York City, in Miami. She's super active and popular on Instagram as Dr. Roqe MD. Thanks to Dr. Roqe for supporting the community and us here at Roqe as our latest rock star. I'm going to mention some folks who've signed up as our BFFs later in the show and give them a shout out. By the way, Captain Reza, a birthday boy, has your girlfriend become a patron of Roqe yet?
Not yet.
Because if she spent just a little bit less money on the thousands of balloons that are this Captain Reza, I
don't know.
I mean,
what
this
he's doing.
girlfriend. First of all, I introduced him to her. She's a friend of mine.
way.
That's actually true.
I can't believe. I mean, he turns up in new clothing every day. he looks like a bit. She's had his teeth whitened. You know, he's got
Wow.
fancy shades. I mean, the guy. He's hit some kind of jackpot.
Wow.
You know.
Nicely done.
She's got good taste. What can I say? And that's
I
why
just
she
don't.
picked me.
I mean, I say this with love. You know, you're my brother, but I don't know what she gets out of this. You know, she's this amazing woman who buys him all this stuff. She's dating Captain Reza.
Once
I mean,
a
you
while,
know.
she sends me Lubia polos. So
Hey, listen, she
knows what
tries to keep everybody happy
Aw,
here.
what a
Come on,
sweetheart.
everybody
I think
gets something
it's
out of it.
the relationship is clearly working out for you.
Oh, it's great.
But I think it's time she became a patron. If she spent 1/100th of what she spends on the shoes she buys you, she could. Anyway, no, you're very lucky. Happy birthday again,
Thank you very much.
Captain Reza, and you're as Hushtip at the tender age of. Are we allowed to say your age?
Sure, go ahead.
33 years old.
Wow.
Yeah,
I thought
he's
you
hit
were
the big
25.
3-3.
Yeah.
That's a good age.
Big 3-3.
How does it feel?
It feels nothing actually. It doesn't feel like anything.
I feel nothing.
I feel nothing.
You're numb.
Khomeini when he was landing in Iran back then. He felt nothing. No,
Right.
but
Excellent reference. Yes, thank you.
Hey, we're going to be talking about politics
Yes,
with our
yes,
guests, soon,
yes.
so nice segue.
Huh.
But yeah, it doesn't feel that much different.
Well, this
from
year in
32.
general doesn't really count, does it?
I don't
This
know where it
whole
went, to be honest,
2020,
2020.
2021, it just kind of went poof and nothing
True.
happened.
True.
Thanks.
So I'm saying his age this
I
past
see.
year doesn't really count.
I see. So
That's
he's
what
still
I'm saying.
32.
Yes,
if
you're
we don't
still
count the
32
last
in my
year.
books. There we
Yeah.
go.
You're getting old, Reza. Let's face it. There's no doubt. There's no two ways about it. So Nayereh Tohidi coming up for a feature chat. By the way, Chef Haas coming up later in the show, and he's got he'll no doubt have something that he's doing these videos now that you can see at rookmedia.com as well. I don't know. Savi Roham, ask Savi Roham if he knows what the chef is going to talk about today.
Oh, savvy.
So he's gonna talk about
Move in, Savi Roham. Yeah.
okay. He's gonna talk about korma.
Khorma?
Korma.
Oh, korma.
Yeah, it's a way to preside meat.
Oh, to braise meat.
Yeah.
Ah, yes.
And to
So
keep
he's
it
going to talk
for,
about braising meat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to keep it for longer, as he says, forever.
Oh,
See, yeah,
how to keep meat forever.
somehow.
Thank
Freezing
you.
it, I suppose, in the freezer. No,
He's
Oh,
gonna
it's a
he's gonna
different
teach us how to use a freezer.
It's a good thing we created the jackpot. We needed it.
Yeah.
All Persian
Okay.
puzzle.
Do you have more, Savi Roham? Yes.
yeah,
Go
but,
ahead.
I just want to say that if people want to watch the video afterwards, it's a perfect video to how to do it, and it looks very delicious.
Oh, okay. Savi Roham does the editing on the new videos that Chef Haas is making. So and I think Shia, the Groovy Shia, has done some music for this video, right? Everyone's coming together. It's like It's a Wonderful Life at the end of the movie. Everyone's together making the. Why are you laughing, Shia? Did you not do the music?
Yes, I mean, yes, I played some music.
He's being humble.
He's
doing a great
I
job.
swear he was like, I said, hey Shia, can you play some, do some sort of piano thing underneath the Chef Haas, because Chef Haas had asked for it underneath his video, and so Shia goes, he's like, well, we could play some Baba Kamini or something. No, I was like, no, you just write something, do something. So he comes in and goes, I came up with something, but I don't think it is very, and he plays it to me. It's like this amazing, like,
I believe you.
This ahead of its time jazz piece, Keith Jarrett piano playing.
I don't think I know a guy more humble than Shia Jun.
It's so good.
And that's his strategy. He undersells it, and it's amazing. So when you
Brilliant.
hear it, you'll be like, dude.
Right.
Yeah.
It's really good. So, tune in for the Chef Haas segment just to listen to Shia's piano playing. Chef Haas coming up, Nayereh Tohidi coming up. But first, it's Thursday. You know what that means. She's a dear friend, a diaspora blend, a gym fanatic, a kook who can be erratic, but lovable, smart, and funny, and on a journey to discover what we've actually discovered. Here we go, Bachaha. It's All Persian to us with Kian Nademi.
All right. So Valentine's Day is coming up. Well, did you know there's actually a Persian version of this day that started in 2000 BC called Sepandar Mazgon. Try saying that 5 times. It's a day celebrating love, friendship, and earth, predating the first Valentine's Day by 2,400 years.
Sepandar Mazgon.
Sepandar Mazgon.
Sepandar Mazgon.
Pandor
Now try 5 times. Sepandar Mazgon.
Well, apparently you and I can't say it once. What is it, Shia?
Sepandor Mazgon.
Sepandor Mazgon.
Listen to the way he says it. Sepandor Mazgon.
Wow.
So brilliant. And it falls only days after Valentine's Day. Coincidence? I think not. Speaking of coincidences, allow me to share with you the greatest love story ever told. The tale goes that there was once a young boy from a wealthy and well-known family who falls in love with a girl from another wealthy and well-known family. The two families disapprove of the young couple's love, so the boy goes absolutely mad. The couple's love is ultimately forbidden, and so they can never be together. This eventually leads to a tragic end for the young lovers. Their love for one another was so deep that death was their only refuge, because death was the only way they could be together. Though their physical bodies were no longer alive, their immortal love would live on forever. Sound familiar?
I know where you're going with this.
Well, why don't you guess?
Okay, because I know this is the story of Layli and Match.
Good
Right,
job.
right?
Yes.
But
yes.
but now that you're reading it, I realize that it sounds like the story of Romeo and Juliet.
Yes, I'm not talking about Romeo and Juliet. This is the story of Layli and Majnun, or Layla and Majnun, depends on which culture you're reading from. This beautiful tale was first written in 1188 AD by the great Persian poet Nizami Ganjavi. He was a man known as the greatest romantic poet in Persian literature, and his epic love story predates Shakespeare's by 400 years. So in Ganjavi's version of the tale, it's set in the Middle Eastern desert, as opposed to the lush city of Verona, Italy. But the basics are the same. Love at first sight, the lovers are kept separated by their parents, the women get weaker the longer they're kept away from their lovers, the men get crazier the longer they're kept from their lovers, father of the girl arranges for her to marry someone else, the couple can't live without each other, blah, blah, blah. And so this all ends with a big kaboom when the lovers tragically die in the exact same place, one after another. Which is how this story got the nickname of Romeo and Juliet of the East. But if you ask me, it should go the other way around. The Layla or Layli and Majnun of the West. And so both stories share the same themes: tragic love, family rivalry, eternal love, etc., etc. Is this all just a big coincidence?
I don't know.
Well, I'll tell you.
No, it's not. Sorry. What are we supposed to say? Of course it's not.
Romeo and Juliet. No.
Well, see-
I mean, when are we filing a suit against Romeo and Juliet for
you.
copyright infringement?
I tell you,
Persian copyright.
If plagiarism existed back then, who knows?
Right.
So though the parallels of the two tragic love stories are undoubtedly there, I'll let you be the judge. Did Sir Shakespeare borrow his famous love story from our very own Nizami Ganjavi? Hey, what do we know? It's all Persian to us.
Well, Shakespeare's only 500 years ago, right? So
yeah.
Layli and Majnun were wandering around a couple thousand years ago, you're saying.
Well, it predates it by 400 years. I mean, that's a significant amount of time. And to be quite clear, during the Crusades, a lot of information was being transferred from the East over to the West. So who knows? Maybe at some point, some soldier came across some epic love story and took it back to the West. We don't know.
That is considered the ultimate love story.
It is, yes. And just a little side fun fact for you. Eric Clapton's idea for the song Layla actually comes from this story of Layla and Majnun. Oh. Yeah. Have you heard that song? You must have, of course.
Yes. Yes, Kian.
He doesn't just listen to Bowie. He
Layla. So, Kian Nadami, thank you. Very timely on the precipice of Valentine's Day. Thank you for that. And thank you, Captain Reza, the birthday boy, Groovy Shia. We'll see you all in a few minutes, or in about an hour from now, I should say, with Chef Haas. So stick around. Let's get to our feature guest for the day. You know, in the context of human rights, minority rights, and women's rights in contemporary Iran, after decades of stilted progress, the question may be asked, are human rights and any semblance of gender equality even attainable at all under this Islamic Republic, or is the only hope to be found in complete overthrow of the regime? And what can we learn from the history of activism in Iran and in the diaspora over the last century to instruct us on how change may come and who is currently at the forefront of that mission? Well, our featured guest today is a professor and the founding director of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies at California State University, Northridge. She is also the former chair of the Gender and Women's Studies Department there. Professor Nayereh Tohidi earned her BSc from the University of Tehran in Psychology and Sociology and her MA and PhD from the University of Illinois. She is the recipient of several awards, including postdoctoral fellowships at Harvard University, the Hoover Institute of Stanford, and the Kedi Balzan Fellowship at the Center for Near Eastern Studies at UCLA. She continues to be affiliated with the UCLA Program of Iranian Studies and the UCLA Center for Near Eastern Studies, where she has been coordinating the bilingual lecture series on Iran since 2003. Her publications include editorship and authorship of Globalization, Gender and Religion, the Politics of Women's Rights in Catholic and Muslim Contexts, Women in Muslim Societies, Diversity Within Unity, and Feminism, Democracy, and Islamism in Iran. And right now, Professor Nayereh Tohidi joins me from Los Angeles today. Hello.
Hello, Mr. Jian Ghomeshi. I'm pleased to be with you today.
I'm very happy to get to talk to you, too. Thank you for doing this. You know, on this week marking the 42nd anniversary of the revolution in Iran, I want to ask you questions today, as I said, about the revolution, the history of activism in Iran and in the diaspora over the last century, how we create change. And I have to say, you're an interesting person to put this to in a sea of polarized views, because you're not only an academic expert in this field, but as I understand it, someone who rejects rigidity in thinking and any specific ideological box. Would that be...
Right. I have done a lot of feminist activism and feminist studies, but I don't want even to limit myself in any kind of ism, because for me, traveling through different countries, but also experiencing activism within the framework of different ideologies have made me rather evasive or kind of pessimist about upholding any dogma, any limiting ideological framework.
Yeah. I want to come back to that. Your thoughts around rigidity of thinking in our community. Let me get to our main question for today. We did this special called The Case for Nasreen 3 months ago on Roqe. Mm-hmm. That would be Nasreen Sotoudeh, the brave and near iconic lawyer and human rights campaigner in Iran who's been jailed simply for defending the rights of women and minorities in Iran. And the response we received was quite instructive, if a little shocking, I would even say. There were many, of course, who are in awe of the stamina and the dignity of Nasreen Sotoudeh continuing to fight for what she believes in, and who were saddened by the way she's been suppressed by the Iranian government, jailed. But then there were others that said, yeah, she's an impressive woman, but she's wasting her time as there is no path forward for finding progress around human rights and women's rights under this current regime. And so it invites the ultimate question that I want to pose to you throughout this interview, which is, how much does human rights and the ultimate equality, liberation, and empowerment of Iranians, and in particular Iranian women, depend on secularism, or to maybe to put it more bluntly, the end of this current regime?
Simple answer is a lot. It is very much dependent on that. But, from our experience under the Shah's regime, we learned that you can't wait to fight for or even get some changes toward your goals in terms of improvement of women's status, women's rights, or human rights, generally speaking, workers' rights, the rights of the child, the children, minorities, be it ethnic minorities, religious minorities, sexual minorities. You can't wait for a regime collapse and regime change and then raise these issues and then fight for these issues. It was a big mistake for some of activists during our time who were rather romantic about, their goals, about the idea of change. Change happens, it takes time. Change happens incrementally. Change happens gradually. It doesn't happen overnight. And in order this change become really profound and meaningful and bring about profound changes, not only change from a dictator with a crown to a dictator with a turban, because that is what has happened in Iran. We were fighting dictatorship, but a modern dictatorship who at least didn't intervene in our private life, in our daily civil rights, right? I could wear whatever I wished, of course, according to the norm of the society. And because society itself was rather polarized and dual especially by late 1970s. A group of minority were very well off and westernized, modernized, and you could see women in mini jupe, in very, you could see X-rated films in cinemas and all that. But at the same time, the majority of people in Iran were still very traditional and conservative. So the culture generally was conservative. And there was a backlash, which, especially by the intervention of the ulama, that's the clerics, mullahs, they mobilized, they appealed to this resentment among many who didn't like some of the things that the modernizing Shah did so rapidly, and also the repressive nature of that dictatorship that didn't let the middle class, the new elite, highly educated elite, to participate in the process of governing and decision making. All that led to the revolution, which needs another hour of talking.
Of course, yeah.
So I don't want to get into that. But I'm going to say that that at that time, mainly the repression was at political level, not at individual, like civil rights, or what you eat, what you believe in as a person. But we got a much worse regime replacing the Shah's regime, which is not only dictatorial as much, but also very ideological and totalitarian. It's a kind of, especially in the beginning, there were semi-fascistic elements to it, that everybody had to become like, they were after a uniform womanhood, a uniform manhood, and everybody had to adhere their definition of religion. And really, it was a theocracy. But it has evolved. It's hard to just call the Iranian regime today a theocratic regime, even though it is, at the core, it is still theocratic. But it had to change. People have forced the regime to change in some ways. So we learned after what we got by fighting the regime and thinking that we are going to call for the end of the Shah no matter what, and then we were going to think what is going to replace it, right? So that was the biggest mistake.
Well, I love the I don't love it, but I'm captivated by the idea of you can't just wait for the change, because it is germane to the current moment, in the sense that even if the Islamic Republic goes away tomorrow, what is next? What kind of assurance is there that something as destructive or damaging will not replace the current regime when it comes to human rights and gender issues, right?
Right. Especially if you don't build up the discourse, the consciousness. You see, during the Shah, we really did not have the opportunity for free media, because of globalization, the new technology we have today. We have so much access to people, to educate people. I mean, people are educating themselves, not that necessarily there is a vanguard here. During the Shah, the guerrillas, the Mujahideen, the Fedayeen, the Tudeh party, the nationalists, they call themselves like vanguard of the society, trying to educate people through the Shabnameh, meaning that things that they would write at night and distribute at night, avoiding the Savak's attention, everything clandestine, but very limited chance for diversity of opinions, for discussion, for debates, unfortunately. And that was Shah's mistakes too, because if the Shah had allowed open discussion, people would have known Khomeini better, right?
But hang on a second. I mean, I'm going to actually go back to the Shah and even before that, because I want to ask you about the roots of activism over the last century, and particularly activist women in the Iranian context. But if we look in the current moment, because I just want to stick with this idea that you say you can't wait for the change. So that suggests you have to do it in incremental steps while you're waiting for the big. But how do we measure any progress? As you know, many people would argue that the small changes are the paradox is those are the things that are going to allow the regime to just last longer. In other words, how are we to assess and treat small victories around human rights or women's rights, say women being allowed into football stadiums during professional men's games? Should we celebrate these steps, or are these just ways for a repressive government to mollify the people and keep dissent at bay?
I understand your question and appreciate that. But listen, human rights used to be seen as luxury under the Shah too. They were saying, why are you wasting your time? This regime is not going to observe human rights. So most people did not talk about human rights. Most activists were underground. But we didn't learn about democracy that way. We didn't learn about importance of human rights. That's why we got a regime without thinking that is a cleric like Khomeini going to observe democracy and human rights. today we have the chance. We have access to the media. We have access to social media. We have the chance to educate ourselves, understand the importance of democracy and what democracy means, what human rights means. So some people are doing that. Nobody is saying that this is the only thing you need to do. If there are people who think the best way is to bring down this regime, they can go ahead and bring down the regime. Nobody is preventing them. Nasrin Sotoudeh is not telling them that, stop, we don't want to change this regime. Nasrin herself was part of 20 people, or actually it was, I think, 15 people, who called for national referendum for the change of the whole constitution.
Right.
That was a radical move. So she is, if you ask her, if I know her very well, she's a, I have been in contact with her and with Narges Mohammadi and several of these women activists and male activists who are working around human rights issues. Because another reason why human rights is important and should be an important discourse in Iran is that many ideologies that we have had are so polarizing, so divisive.
Right.
Look how divided the Iranian opposition is. I'm sure you know better than
Oh
me.
yeah.
And why? Because everybody has their own agenda, their own preferred ideas and preferred visions and preferred ideological framework. But what brings all these forces of opposition together is the framework of human rights. That is the one that everybody would accept. Nobody would.
But again,
would say
I'm
that,
trying to drill down into. I mean, I don't want to chase our tail on this, but just if I just one more time, I go because I'm trying to get my head around it. If democracy, say, is not possible. If gender equity, let's say, is not possible under a current style conservative Islamist clerical state, or whatever you want to call it, neo-theocracy, post-theocracy, which has pursued sex segregation, extreme forms of legal and practical discrimination against women. If that's not possible, then what is the value of scratching away to try and get some little rewards if you're not going to be able to win the prize? I guess that's at the heart of it. I am in awe of Nasrin Sotoudeh. I'm not suggesting that anybody's doing anything that isn't awesome in terms of wanting to create change or do their part. But what is the value of it if we agree that it can't happen under this current context?
The value is that even these little rewards make us hopeful, make us move on, make us keep on fighting. Listen, I don't agree that we haven't had any results. If you want to be maximalist, yes, we haven't achieved change of the regime. But if you believe that there can be little by little changes, it has happened. I'm not saying that I'm opposing or Nasrin or her type are opposing those who are trying to bring about profound, as you said, like the big prize, right?
Right.
They can go ahead and do it. But Nasrin is a lawyer, and she has decided to advocate her life to defending human rights.
Yes.
And defending people who are in prison. Because somebody needs to do that. Not everybody can be, like during the Shah, you know what they were telling me when I was saying that, the Shah is doing good things by like family reform or by hiring more women in jobs, and we have now more opportunities and so forth. They would tell me, those leftist friends of mine would tell me, you're wasting your time. These are tricks. These are capitalistic tricks to make Shah more appealing to people like you. Don't get fooled by those reforms. We need to change this whole regime. And I was so naive to accept that. But today I won't accept that. I won't wait until the big change comes, because I know that people need to learn the importance of these little by little changes. Look at the way women were covered in the beginning of the Islamic state in Iran, and look the way they are covered today.
Right.
Yeah, they had to be covered completely by this black chador. Only their face and hands could be shown, and it could be, and the colors you could use were only dark blue, dark brown, and gray or black. But women, little by little, changed the color of dressing. They have fashionized everything. Look how fashion-oriented women in Iran are.
But you know how people would respond to that. They
And
would say they would say it's only been a year and a half since Aban, where they slaughtered 1,500 people in the streets for
course.
exercising their voice, or
So
whatever.
what do you want? What do you want women do? Can all women become like now a guerrilla fighter? What do you want them to do? You can't expect everybody to do maximum fight.
It's interesting that you should mention women, because at the same time as I'm posing that overreaching question, which I realize there's no easy answer to, so I'm putting you in a box, and I forgive me for that. The refrain from many historians and political scientists, like, for example, Abbas Milani, who said this on our program not too long ago, has been that the best prospect for change for Iranian society in general is in the hands of women. And female activists are the ones who have been leading the way in terms of trying to affect change in recent decades. Do you agree?
I agree. And the reason is that this regime is so obsessed with control of women, especially women's body. Women's body has become the battleground for different forces of, different ideologies in Iran. Like when women, today the emblem or the identity marker or marker of power for the regime, the Islamist state, was covering of women's body. Today, from that, there is only one scarf left. But that's why they are obsessed, at least to keep that, to show that they are still in control, they are still in power. Right. But women have been very creative in the way that they have been fighting this regime. One step ahead, two step behind, again 2 steps ahead, 1 step behind. They have been cleverly, as kind of the Shahzad, metaphor that tried to talk this king away from killing her, because she understood how obsessed and how psychologically pathologic he was. This is a pathology in a way for these mullahs to be so obsessed with women's hair, women's body, covering of it. So women have, using psychology, have gradually insensitized them toward showing a little bit more color, more fashion, more body. But that's not the primary issue for women, right? Of course, it symbolizes a lot of things, what you wear and the freedom of dress, and of course, it's very, very important. But women also are achieving in education. Look how much they have achieved and obtained. Even they surpass men in universities. Over 60% of the students in universities are women. Women are now better educated than men. But of course, they don't have the same opportunities for employment. The employment rate is very low in Iran. In other words, Iran's women's status is very paradoxical. On the one hand, they are very conscious, very active, very present in society, despite the idea of the regime that wanted to seclude them and have even early retirement for working women and all that. But women have kept their presence, and this presence has its own power. They have imposed themselves on this anti-woman and kind of misogynist regime. So they have gained a lot if you compare where they are today. The level of their demands, look how outspoken they are, how fearless they are. They are challenging the clerics, the police, on daily basis. Many women get arrested because of not wearing the proper dress. Many of them are just fighting back, speaking out and speaking back to the police and so forth. That's why they are so scared of women. And that's why women have become primary agents of change. But the change doesn't come in one form. Cultural change is as important, right?
But this is a perfect segue, because I want to. You don't know where you're going if you don't know where you come from, and I want to ask you a little bit about how we got here, because you've said that Iran's engagement in gender politics and women's activism is not a new phenomenon. It's true that we talk about it now, but it's rather a culmination of women's quiet involvement, you've called it, in Iranian politics over the last century. Can you describe that quiet involvement, as you've called it, in that period before the 60s and 70s, when women's liberation became easier to identify in Iran? What did quiet involvement entail?
Well, people think that all of a sudden the Shah, let's start from Reza Shah. Reza Shah all of a sudden decided to demand compulsory unveiling of women.
Yes.
But there were women even then, women's associations, that among their demands included freedom of choice for hijab. By hijab, I mean the cover, right? The Islamic cover, the veil. So that was part of women's demands. But then Reza Shah, when he traveled to Turkey, and also the changes that he saw in Turkey, and also a lot of news coming from the Soviet Union at that time, and how women in the Caucasus, in Muslim republics, were becoming unveiled. So there was this influence of the neighboring countries. For Reza Shah, especially Turkey, was a turning point. He saw that, okay, if you can do it in Turkey and in Islamic, very traditional societies of Tajikistan, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, in the northern part of, the neighboring of Iran, why can't we do it in Iran? So he used, he was inspired by Ataturk, but he used the method of the Soviets, the Bolsheviks, rather than Ataturk, made it compulsory.
Right.
So but that's another issue. His intention was good, but his method was very heavy-handed and autocratic and authoritarian. The same way that our modernization in Iran has been very, top-down and authoritarian, which is part of the problem.
Can I just ask you about that? What you're getting at there, because if I understand correctly, it's complex because. Yes. When in 1936 Reza Shah decrees the abolishment of the veil, this is seen as progress for those who believe in secular democracies. But it's complex because it's also leaving no room for women to choose if they want to wear the veil, and so
yes. Not only that, but also it makes it like it makes women depend on the state. It takes away the agency of women. It becomes like a gift from these male autocrats rather than women gaining it by their own organization, their own efforts. And because the best way that the Reza Shah could do this was to say that, from now on, women have the right to wear hijab or not to wear it. And have the police and gendarmerie, rather than taking off women's hijab from their head, helping them, protecting them from the attacks of others. That was the way to go for it. So anyway, I'm saying that unfortunately, our modernization has been always contradictory and with problems. Despotism always intervened in the process. But during the second Pahlavi, Mohammad Reza Shah, he understood the problem with that method, and he left women to decide what to wear, which was a good decision to make. And the reform about family, like the family protection law, again, people think that was the gift from the Shah. No, many women fought for it. Not not going to the streets because that wasn't possible, but they created associations, lobby group. They kept writing letters. They kept pushing. And then even the women's organization that the Shah, allowed and created, and actually then by that, when they kind of asked every women's organization to join this government-supported organization, the Sazman Zanan Iran, the Women's Organization of Iran. It has some advantages because it has now a budget, support of the state, but the disadvantage was that, again, it didn't give women the agency,
right.
And you had to work closely with the regime, with the Shah, and for some women, especially after the coup, the 1953 coup d'etat, some women didn't want to collaborate with the government anymore. So there was again some contradiction and problem here. It was really complex. But what I'm trying to say here is that people don't realize that women have kept fighting, either within the women's organization, women like Hale Esfandiari, like Mahnaz Afkhami, like the women senators or women deputies in Majlis were fighting for the reform in family law. Because the problem was that even though the government was secular, and many of the institutions, the state institutions, became secular under Reza Shah and under Mohammad Reza Shah, the family law, the personal status law remained under Sharia. This is during Pahlavi era. They never secularized family law. Why? Because they made a deal with the clergy that, okay, we are not going to touch your power base. You are going to still have control over women and family and personal status. We are in the public life, in the employment. They had secular.
Let me come to that. I just want to point at something that is a marker we can look at to a significant change that happened by the early 1960s, with your point taken that it was the quiet involvement of Iranian women that helped to induce, to bring about this change under Mohammad Reza Shah. But in 1963, under the Shah, Iranian women achieved the right to vote and be elected to parliament,
right.
and in the subsequent...
Finally.
And in the subsequent election, 4 women were voted into parliament, 2 to the Senate. I mean, when I actually went and looked through this historically, it bears mentioning that this is during a period when women in, say, Switzerland didn't have the right to vote yet. So it is significant. I mean, it seems draconianly, backward now, but it is a significant note, to put an asterisk next to. How pivotal was that moment?
It was very significant. And you know that one of the reasons why Khomeini opposed that whole so-called white revolution was especially because of giving the rights to women to be elected and to also elect. And so it was very significant. It was empowering. But unfortunately, due to lack of democracy, lack of different parties, it remained very limited to kind of upper class elite women. It didn't have impact massively on wider society. And by the way, Iran was not the first Muslim majority country to give the right to women to vote. It was actually the 8th one. There were several other countries, including Turkey, Tunisia, Morocco, Egypt, who were far ahead of Iran in terms of the right to vote and other issues as well. But Iran was progressing, no doubt about that. And it was rather, Shah was rather convinced gradually to go for these reforms. He was very reluctant in the beginning. The same with Reza Shah. Reza Shah himself had 3 wives. Why should he care about reforming women, family law? But regardless, we had, as I said, modern modernizers. We had who were at least partially secular. But what we ended up with was a government that has, the first victim of it was women. That is Islamic government.
But before we got to the Islamic government, I wanted to turn it around and throw this at you. This period of the 60s and 70s is also a period where we begin to see an increase in fundamentalist opposition to the new liberties, right?
Yes.
And there's been an argument made that, in contrast to what we've just been talking about, that in fact it was too fast, the white revolution in the 60s and 70s, and it therefore created this reflexive backlash from the clergy that grew in power and from fundamentalists and hardliners. Do you agree with that?
Partially, yes, it was too fast, and whenever something happens, a change in culture, especially material culture, it creates cultural lag, because especially most part of our modernization was through infusion. It was rather imported, right? Exported from the West to Iran, rather than being indigenous, starting from bottom up, or starting from like I remember people were saying that we have cars now, but we don't know how to drive them. That's why traffic was so awful. People would not observe the rules of the traffic because people had not learned how to respect laws, because laws were not important in Iran. That again brings me to the importance of democracy. Democracy is a culture. You have to learn it. And it starts from the family. If a family is patriarchal and father is the only one who decides, and mother has no power, and children should obey this dictatorial father, and then society is like family writ large, that you have the father of fathers, who is the biggest dictator, and you have to just follow. Then you don't learn how to respect laws and rules, because the Shahs themselves did not observe the constitution. They did not go by the constitution. They ruled as autocrats rather than just being king. Like the constitutional monarch. They were not constitutional. They did not observe constitution. So the whole society was deprived of a democratic culture. There was no chance to culturalize people, to socialize them in democracy. We had this fundamentalist reactionary backlash, but we could have fought it if there were a space for debate, for education, for free press.
But this comes back to your point that you have to bring people, you have to wean people on democracy before you even have the democracy, or they won't know what to do with it, or how to manage it, or how to get it if the opportunity comes. It's fascinating. As we get up closer to the revolution, I mean, this lead up to the revolution of 79 is always fascinating to me on so many levels. You were there. We have this strange moment when we're talking about women, where scores of liberal women did support Khomeini, and many of them expected that progress would continue after the revolution. Obviously, it's hard to retroactively assign blame when so many intellectuals and progressives believed in the revolution at first. But in hindsight, Nayereh, why would women's rights activists believe that an Islamic republic would give women equality, include removing all the existing obstacles for participation of women in affairs of the state?
They did not. You see, the anti-Shah movement began by secular men and women, by writers, by poets, in that famous 10 days of poetry reading, Shabhay Sherkhani, in the Goethe Institute. By the people welcomed the change of policy of the U.S. government when President Carter tried to emphasize human rights. They said, so maybe we have now an opportunity to talk about democracy, to talk about our ideas and criticize the government, the repression, and call for building of parties and so forth. So it was in the beginning, even the clerics were very cynical about Carter and the whole notions of human rights. They came late. They just kind of, when they saw that, well, looks like there are real changes are happening, and Shah is giving some space. So they jumped onto the wagon of the revolution. Besides, many people, of even these intellectuals, secular intellectuals, most of them leftists and some of them nationalists, they were not asking for a revolution or downfall of the Shah. They were asking for reforms. I remember one of the slogans was "Islahat ari, diktatori na." Reform, yes to reforms, no to dictatorship. So they were not calling for downfall of the Shah or revolution in the beginning. Even someone like Mehdi Bazargan, who was the first prime minister,
Yes.
whose reign did not last more than 1 year. He resigned because of the hostage taking and all that. He was a very moderate, rather liberal Islamic. I wouldn't even call him Islamist because he didn't believe in theocratic system. Khomeini and his type came and deceived people, or who knows. I don't think he was honest, but how deliberate his deception was, who knows? People cannot read his mind. But he's the one who has written that book, Hukumat Islami, who never was read by people because it was not allowed. So many intellectuals even hadn't read it. I remember Professor Kedi here was the one who was saying, look at this book. People should know about this book.
Well, let me just explain that to any non-Iranians or non-Farsi speakers. There's a famous saying from Ayatollah Khomeini when he was in Paris. This is on the precipice of the revolution, aside from the book, where he said, women will all have a role in the society, but within an Islamic framework.
Right.
And I always wonder if the activists at the time, again, it's hard to blame anybody in retrospect, but if this was properly questioned as to what an Islamic framework would mean, right?
It wasn't, and because it was almost too late by then. That when Khomeini says that, when Khomeini went to Paris and started propagating from there by his cassette tapes, he had already become the very important figure in the movement. Unfortunately, it was so people had to. People didn't know him well. We just started learning from him, and this people like Yazdi and Qudsade and Bani Sadr were surrounding him, and when the media were interviewing Khomeini, they were responding. They were even translating the way that appeared very democratic.
Right.
So we were misled. In many ways, people were misled. But a few women who got the chance to interview Khomeini themselves, some journalists, like that famous journalist who also interviewed the Shah,
Oriana Fallaci,
whom Khomeini almost threw out of his room. You see, women did not join the street demonstrations to have an Islamic republic. They didn't. That's why they were the first force. The first ever demonstration were done by women against Khomeini's new declarations of like forced hijab, removing women judges from their positions, and also putting aside the family protection law. So women were the first groups. But what happened? Many leftists, secular leftists, secular nationalists, as well as religious nationalists, they didn't support women. They said, oh, the veil is just a minor issue. And of course, another trick was that initially Ayatollah Taleghani, who was relatively more progressive, he said that no, hijab is not going to become compulsory. Just go home to these women who were on the streets for almost a week. I'm going to talk with the Imam Khomeini, and things are going to change. No, don't be scared. So women lost the momentum. They shouldn't have believed. Maybe Taleghani
But
was
what
also
happened? What happened to what happens to this movement that you've been so eloquently talking about that starts way back to the Reza Shah? That I don't want to be insensitive asking this question, because I've sat here over the last few months interviewing people like Shahrnush Parsipour or Marangisa Kar, who were, what happened?
Right.
They were thrown in jail is what happened. That's part of what happened. Or Homo Shah, who had to, escape and leave. But as you say, the veil gets officially reintroduced in 1979. In fact, March 8th, 1979, which is Women's Day. And there are marches and protests against mandatory veiling. What happened to that movement?
Okay. Because they, at least some of these state elements, more secular elements, promised that no, it's not going to become compulsory. It's not going to become part of the law. It took 2 years for the government to legalize a compulsory veiling. They didn't do it at once. They started and then they kind of retreated because they saw how women opposing it vigorously. But when women lost the momentum, gradually they began to started in the different workplaces, and gradually put it in the law. But what was happening in between was taking away, hostage taking, occupying the embassy. The whole atmosphere became again anti-American, this anti-imperialism has been one of the issues that has really sacrificed women's rights in the expense of being anti-imperialist. Everybody kept saying, look, this is not the time to fight for the veil. The veil is so secondary for imperialism, who's going to bring the Shah back. We should make sure that the Shah is not coming back. That was one kind of way to distract women. The second, the most important one, was the start of the war with Iraq. Under almost every experience of wars in different countries that I have studied, women's issues become relegated to the future and marginalized, and women have to become quiet because they are going to appear as betraying the unity of the society against this outside enemy,
You're undermining the team all of a sudden.
Yes.
Yeah.
So women had to be quiet. Those were those 8 years of war, which was the hardest for women. Not that women were fighting necessarily, but because that was the time that the regime was consolidating this anti-women project and anti-women's rights policies everywhere. They used that occasion to make the law of qisas, retribution, which is very harsh set of laws based on very old tribal Sharia-based laws. Eye for an eye, and those things let me just give you an example, that the testicle of a man worth as much as the whole body of a woman. If you cut the testicle of a man, you have to pay the blood money, the retribution, and the price is as much as if you kill a woman. I mean, that is the type of the law, which is so sexist, so violent, so backward, that goes back 1400 years ago of a tribal society. So the hardliners took the upper hand, first of all. Look, people like Bazargan were marginalized, let alone women, right?
Of course,
Bazargan,
of course.
who fought for Islamic revolution.
Right.
They were all the reformers, all the moderates were marginalized. The hardliners had the day and running the show. And that's why Khomeini said the war is a blessing. Jang ne'mate. And the war was a blessing. And I don't think the war was, people only blame Saddam Hussein and Iraqi forces for the start of this war. But I blame the Iranian regime as much.
You mean it was a blessing because it allowed the Islamic formalists to really co-opt, finally co-opt the revolution.
The power, silence people, to make people silent, to repress very easily. We are fighting the enemy, right? That's why war worked. That 8-year war worked very much against women, and they completely stopped not only women's movement and activism, but also the ethnic groups, religious minorities, workers, writers, journalists. Everybody had to serve the purpose of war. This divine, mission.
It's so, I wish I had 100 hours with you because because it's so insightful, and each one of these periods, each one of these moments requires the whole interview. But let me zoom ahead again now and say, it is obvious. It would no one could make the case that there was anything close to a semblance of women's rights through the first decade or two of after the revolution. There is something you called this paradoxical earlier in this interview, and there is something that's really complicated and confusing that's happening around the plight of women in Iran right now. Because to restate almost exactly what you said earlier in this interview, there is obvious ways in which there's horrible disparity. The participation in the labor force is only 17%, severely underrepresented in senior public positions.
And 17, by the way, is the most optimistic estimate.
Right. Underrepresented in private sector as managers, all of that. And yet then you have women comprising over 50% of university graduates. Mm-hmm. So there's this confusing and paradoxical data. How do we make sense of that in present day Iran?
Right. In one of my long articles, which is a chapter of a textbook, I have tried to explain all that. Not only those data that you mentioned are important, but there's another index, which is internationally as an index of achievement and better status for women, and that is the rate of fertility, the birth rate. Women in Iran have achieved to reduce the birth rate from 6 for a woman on average to 2. And this is very important, because if you are busy keeping your time is consumed with raising babies and giving birth, you can't work outside home. Sure. You can't have higher education and so forth. So we know that there is positive correlation between a low fertility rate and a higher rate of employment and higher rate of education, higher rate of political participation, higher rate of cultural expression and cultural productions for women and all that. So, and we know that Khomeini, the supreme leader, so to speak, is trying to encourage women and even force, in some cases, women to become more pregnant, give more birth, and he's not succeeding. That itself is kind of a way to fight that definition of womanhood that the regime wants to accomplish. Women say, we want to have our own lives too. We can't afford to have more than 2 children, because women now have become more conscious about themselves as individuals, as people who have to enjoy their life, have to have freedom of time for leisure, for education, for arts. Look, many of the best books and bestsellers are written by women. Literature book, poetry, stories, novels, the books, the films. Look how women have become present, and many films are addressing women's issues, even the ones which are made by men directors or male filmmakers. So that's why it's paradoxical. Many women have learned to play some musical instrument.
And it's confusing because if a non-Iranian friend of mine or somebody, or not a friend of mine, says, that backward place Iran, and where women are treated like, you feel defensive, not because you want to defend the regime, but because that there's this whole new cohort of brilliant women in Iran who are independent, who are smart, but how do we frame that within this oppressive kind of context? Right?
Because the regime can do only as much. The regime in a country, in a globalized context, is only one force. Very big force, of course, especially its brutal force is always there. But people also have learned, especially again thanks to this new communication technology, to the satellite TV, to the whole processes of globalization, the currency of human rights, the currency of women's rights discourses. These are important. Women are learning from this. They cannot prevent people from learning this because of the social media, because of the Telegram, the Facebook, the Twitter. All these are helping women to assert themselves all the time, to shape their own lives despite the regime. So we don't give the credit when we talk about these achievements by women. We don't give the credit to the regime. It is the byproduct of Iran as a modern country. It's a byproduct of 100 years of changes. There we had a strong, professionalized, educated middle class from the previous regime, right? They are the one, like people that you just mentioned, people like Parsipur, Homa Sarshar, Mehrangiz Kar, and many others. These are representative of a middle class women who have been the mothers of these new generations. The family, the mothers who have trained this new generation of younger women were the ones who were against Islamic Republic. And they have indoctrinated, socialized their children differently from the indoctrination that they get at the schools. That's why there is this discrepancy between the state discourse, the state ideology, and the current values that people have. Iran is actually very pro-Western when you compare it with many other traditional societies.
So let me ask you about that young generation then. Those young female activists within Iran right now. Tell me about the significance that you see of, say, the Daughters of the Revolution.
Look at the daughters of the revolutionary, what do they call it? دختران خیابان انقلاب.
Yes.
Right? The girls of the revolution street. What did they do? They focused on one of their demands, especially for them, it is very critical. Maybe the older generation kind of submitted to this scarf, to this more modest way of clothing. But these younger women, as the younger generation goes after fashion and appearance is important for them in every culture, right? Every country. They want to be themselves. They want to be free what to wear. So look how theatrically, very peacefully, and very creatively they asserted their demand for freedom of hijab, meaning hijab should not be compulsory. Leave alone people who don't want to cover their hair. So that, because that is kind of, it has become a very sensitive issue. Regime is very sensitive to it. So many women think that even though it is just a civil and civic demand, it is not political, but the regime has made it political, right? Because they think that if you don't wear this cover, you are actually disobeying the regime. Right. You are making a political statement. And that is true. They are making a political statement. But they say, no, I'm just asking for my primary human rights, my civic right to wear what I want to wear. So, yeah, this younger generation, not only against the compulsory hijab, but also against the many forms of violence against women and against discriminatory laws. They had a wonderful campaign, which was also repressed, especially after the Green Movement, when they had this, widespread repression of the movement for democracy. They also repressed this campaign of the 1 million signatures.
Yes.
To change the discriminatory law. So there have been several campaign for the freedom to enter into stadiums. There have been campaign against stoning, and they were successful. They have stopped the stoning. So when people say, oh, these human rights campaigns end nowhere and we don't get anything, no, that's not true. Like women have been able to stop stoning. That is one, not a minor achievement.
Right.
Women have been able to stop the more backward changes in the family law. So the family law, which is now practiced, is basically the same family law that we had during the Shah's regime, meaning the polygamy is restricted, but there are some worse elements still there, but they had to retreat back to some of the reforms that were made during the Shah's regime about the family law. And of course, the temporary marriage has been encouraged by the regime. It wasn't illegal under the Shah either, but it wasn't encouraged.
Right.
But now the regime, the whole discourse actually encourages. And also economic situation has made it so hard to start a family that many people now have white marriage. That itself is a taboo breaking move by the younger generation, that they say, we don't want your temporary marriage based on Sharia, because we don't believe in that. We don't want to bring a state into this relationship we have. We want to have a relationship based on love and compatibility without even registering it, because we don't want to make it official yet. We are not ready for that, financially or whatever reason.
Sure. Yeah.
So we have several forms of marriages now. The changes that is happening in marriage pattern, in the meaning of love, in sexuality patterns. Even homosexuals now have their own movement, although mostly in diaspora, because it's not possible inside Iran.
Of course.
But there are so much changes in consciousness of this younger generations, and this sense of self-confidence, and this modern sense of individuality, which is very threatening to the regime that believes in this collective identity for people. They are, scared of individuality, right? And individual preferences. They want to homogenize people. But these younger ones say, no, we are, each one of us are different, and you have to respect our differences.
Wow.
So these are all signs of resistance. I am optimistic, especially in a medium run or long term about Iran, because we are, by our blood and skin, have experienced how awful a religious despotism is.
Yes.
The most awful dictatorship is religious dictatorship, and ideological dictatorship, which, authoritarian which is semi-fascism. I mean, scientifically, maybe you can't call this fascism because economically it is not fascistic, but culturally it has a lot of elements of a totalitarian fascistic system.
But you know, the only thing that, or one of the few things with all of what you've just said, that make me less optimistic is the rigidity of thinking in our community. And first of all, I have to thank you. This has been fantastic, and I learn from you, and I really appreciate you taking the time and helping us navigate these waters to really understand, put some history behind where we've gotten to today. But I want to actually
thank you very much for your good questions and your challenges. It is hard to address all these things in one session.
It is. Well, if you want to commit to a 10-part series, we can. I want to actually come back to something you said at the beginning, though, and it dovetails with what I just said about the rigidity, because you said you really, and I've heard you say this before, that you really these days one thing you've learned is to try to steer away from rigid opinion ideologies, fanaticisms, and yet, as you know, the Iranian community tends to be quite rigid, quite lacking in nuance when asserting how to deal with the problem of contemporary Iran. How do we inject nuance or any kind of perspective balance into our conversations?
Very good question and very important issue. By Iranian community, I suppose you mean mostly diaspora, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Because I think inside Iran, you may get a different perception about the level of rigidity. People are more pragmatic inside Iran. That is my sense of understanding. Even feminism, there are different schools of feminism. Of course, there are ideological ones who are like Marxist feminists or socialist feminists, which are less rigid than Marxist feminists, and or some who are also kind of Muslim feminists, who are they still adhere to the Islamic principles, but at the same time they want equality. There are Muslim male intellectuals who call themselves Milli Mazhabi, meaning that I'm more like first a nationalist, but I'm also a religious person. So I can integrate my religious beliefs into my nationalism and go for a secular government.
Okay.
So I want to draw your attention to also this kind of eclectic views and forces in Iran who are becoming more pragmatic and have become more pragmatic. If you wanted me, as I have written in my writings, what is one of the main characteristics of Iranian feminism, I would say pragmatism.
That it's interesting, because I wonder if that's a pattern. You would know this better than me as a professor of these studies, but if that's a pattern that is reflected in diasporas in general, because it reminds me of Israel and how people in Israel tend to be a lot more open to different ideas, and there's a lot of healthy debate that happens, whereas in the diaspora, the Israeli diaspora, there are very rigid opinions, and it seems like we've become that as well.
Right. And similar to Cuban diaspora. The Cuban diaspora, before they had the more younger generations of Cuban Americans, were very rigid. But I understand the younger generations who have the chance to travel back to Cuba, they understand the nuances. They understand what works for change and what doesn't work. So that's why I think, but also in more recent years, thanks to, I shouldn't say thanks, because I don't like, thanks means positive, due to the influence of this populist, right-wing populism in America, some people call it Trumpism. People, even American people, many of them have become rigid, right? I mean, society has become rather polarized. So there are many among Iranian diaspora who like Trump very much because they thought and expected that Trump is going to bring down the Iranian regime, and so they are going to be able now to have another good regime and go back to Iran and so forth. But of course, my and analysis of many other people was that Trump was not really after regime change. He was after making a good deal with the Iranian regime.
But in the context of all of this, I mean, look, again, to restate the question, because I led you astray a little bit too, asking about Iran, but and talking about the diaspora. But I mean, you're sitting in Los Angeles. You know all about the rigidity of the Iranian American community and the different points of view and the factions. Do you have a prescription for how we kind of contend with this? How we have the conversations we need to have? How we try and achieve some nuance? How we take steps towards unity? Is that possible?
It's very difficult. It has been very difficult. There has been some coalitions made, again, mostly based or around the principles of human rights and basic principles of democracy. It has been possible, but these coalitions have been very fragile too, unfortunately, and many of them have been short-lived. Look, even among the monarchists, right, you would expect that at least monarchists can be united around their expected future monarch, that is the Prince Reza Pahlavi, right? Yes. But even monarchists are so divided. They can't even come together as monarchists, let alone other groups, like a coalition among monarchists and non-monarchists and nationalists and leftists. This division, especially in diaspora, I would say, is stronger and more harmful and has made people more rigid. I am hopeful, given the opportunity. In Iran, the problem is not necessarily being very divided. It is because people don't have the opportunity to get together because of the repressive nature of the regime. They prevent any assembly, any coalition building. Parties are just, formality. They are called parties.
Right.
They don't have any power. You can't have really a democratic culture and democratic system without having different parties, right? I mean, you have to accept first that the diversity of ideas and parties, and the parties should compete with each other over their plans and the programs they offer. We don't have that in Iran. Everything is controlled by the Guardian Council, and they screen the candidates, and the coalitions made ad hoc, just like a month before the elections. And elections are, for the most part, manipulated and rigged, sometimes completely. So the problem in Iran is that there is no political space and opportunity to get united. And outside Iran is this rigidity and internal fighting, which I don't have any good answer for it. But I have seen that whenever there is a strong movement inside Iran, people get together around that movement. Yeah. We had the largest Iranian demonstrations and getting together outside Iran when the Green Movement emerged inside Iran. Yes. Remember, we had the younger Iranians who never participated in demonstrations came. I could see them. So many young Iranians, they were saying that, this is my first time to come to demonstrations. Yes. Because they became hopeful. They became hopeful that change is possible. Now people in Iran are saying, where is my vote? Very democratic slogan, very non-sectarian, non-Islamic, very democratic. So it was hopeful. So that's why it is more, critical to have something inside Iran to start, and which will mobilize also the diaspora.
Gotcha. And potentially bring unity to the a semblance of unity to the diaspora. Let me revise a final question then, and or add to it by saying, if you can't give the answer because it's an impossible one to the question of how we inject nuance and balance, let me ask you on a very personal level. If you take off your academic hat for a second. Do you have any personal rules or like you guide yourself by when you say you really try to steer away these days from rigidity and ideology and fanaticism? How do you practice that?
You see, I have been busy with this, or hopeful about cross-pollination of good ideas, of good democratic discourse, human rights discourse, women's rights discourse,
yes,
to spread that, to make this part of our learning and part of our value system. And by cross-pollination, I mean diaspora can play really a positive role and constructive role, rather than trying to kind of create a leadership from outside Iran to mobilize people inside Iran, but play a collaborative role to enrich the culture of democracy, to enrich the culture of human rights. And of course, another factor that we didn't talk about is the international factor and international support which is needed here. But then it is also so politicized, unfortunately. When we get support from international organizations, and especially governments, then it immediately, the regime has been very skillful to taint that movement or group as being
another face of imperialism or something.
Right, yeah. Exactly. But then one of the things that some of us, especially feminists, have been trying to do is to debunk this false narrative of, if you get help from or support, if a government, for example, let me give you a concrete example because this is important. During the Green Movement, one of the reasons some people argue that movement was so easily suppressed and so many people were killed, of course, was because the leadership of that movement did not demand or allow President Obama to support that movement clearly and with a strong, assertive voice. Because they even said, we don't want to become associated with any government.
Right.
But that was a mistake. In this globalized world, we need our own allies. I mean, if the opposition, if the democratic forces, if the feminist forces want to be able to be a force to reckon with, they also need their international allies. The regime in Iran has its own international allies. They are being supported by Russia and China, right? They are supporting their Hezbollah and the Shia activists in different countries, like in Bahrain, in Yemen, in Iraq, in Lebanon. They are internationalists when it comes to getting, their maintaining their own power, but they want us to be isolated from any international networking and international support. But we have to come up with the right way to do it, with the way that we don't become manipulated by outside forces. We don't lose our own independence and agency, but we get support, the type of support we needed. For example, support with the internet, moral support, condemnation and even targeted sanction if it is necessary. Not this all-sided, kind of blind sanction that can hurt people, but targeted sanction, kind of a smart sanction, can be more effective. So we need to work on those issues as well. So that makes us less rigid when it comes to this anti-imperialism thing that is has become kind of a cliche and outdated, because even imperialism today has different meaning in a globalized context. There are many powers. The world has become so polycentric, right? We don't have this one power like the United States which is almighty and can do everything. No, that is just an illusion. The Saudi Arabian power is as important. Iran is itself a kind of a semi-empire itself in the region. And there are many powerful states that are playing important roles. So we need to also kind of refine and revisit our global understanding of politics.
Yeah. There's so much there that I cannot end this interview without saying to be continued. Please, I hope you'll come back. It has been such a pleasure. خیلی متشکرم. I really enjoyed it.
خیلی ممنونم.
And I hope that I get to see you and speak to you again soon. Merci.
خواهش میکنم. منم از شما ممنون. Thank you very much.
خداحافظ.
خداحافظ.
Nayereh Tohidi, professor and founding director of Middle Eastern and Islamic Studies at California State University, Northridge. Nayereh Tohidi joined us from Los Angeles today. The team microphones are back on. So much to consider from that. I really enjoyed that. That was most interesting. Democracy takes time. You have to be ready for them. You have to teach people democracy before you get democracy. I thought that was fascinating. Captain Reza, Groovy Shaya, and the fabulous Keon, or who wants to say anything before we get to Chef Haas? Go ahead.
I don't even know what to say. It was so much to take on, and truly educational. Like, honestly, like, I didn't know what to expect when the interview started, and academic interviews are not necessarily my thing, but oh my god, I was glued to my seat. It was fascinating. I
feel like I just got a 10-session class on women's issues in Iran, which I would have never had. I did not, like Reza said, I did not expect this whatsoever. I learned so much. One point that I want to draw, I had no idea that that under the Pahlavi era, the family status fell under Sharia law. Even then, at that point, when, like the way my parents described it, women had so many rights, I had no idea. Even then, the women's bodies were tied to the government in some way.
Yeah.
It's she draws that point as well, that women's bodies are being politicized and used to fight this battle, and it's insanity in this day and age that we still have to struggle.
Right.
It's crazy.
Shaya?
It's really hard to put any comment after this interview, but I really appreciate all the people who are trying to be, I don't know how can, in the middle.
She's trying to, as she said a couple of times, she's trying to reject rigidity of thinking on either extreme, which is probably very difficult in her field, because people are expecting her to come down on one side or another of these issues.
I appreciate the people, especially in this field, that they want to avoid being in a particular box.
I do feel like I get the feeling talking to some of these folks, like Abbas Milani or Nayereh Tohidi, that I just want to ask them questions for hours and hours, and because she's got so much to one can learn from, and it's so valuable. I'm grateful that she came on the show, and
like you said, to be continued.
She
has so much more to talk about. So
maybe she can do the It's All Persian to Us.
She probably can. That's a sad reality.
I probably wouldn't have to study. You should just do it.
No, it's her background.
So, to be continued indeed. Speaking of segments, like It's All Persian to Us, it's Thursday. Who's waiting just to speak and start salivating now, because he's the captain of cuisine. He's the culinary colonel. He's the Tabrizi talisman, the Farsi food meister, the Turkish tradesman. It's your chef, Hoss-pitality. And this is Roqe Hoss-pitality.
Hi, this is your chef Hoss-pitality, and this is Roqe Hoss-pitality.
Hello, Chef Haas.
Hello.
Hello. How is beautiful San Francisco?
It's great, and I feel awesome. The awesome comes to me soon, so I found my word.
Very witty.
Awesome. I love it. And this, by the way, this is the first time you haven't answered that question by saying, I just jogged or ran 15 miles or something.
No, I was excited to introduce the awesome word.
That's right. You are indeed awesome. What are you teaching us about today?
Well, today we're going to talk Iranian-style braised meat and its techniques and why they did that.
Okay, Iranian-style braising meat. I have to confess that Savvy Roham, who works with you on these segments now, has earlier in the show give us a little heads up of what we're going to be talking about. So, braising meat. I'm going to ask you first, I guess, as far as I remember, braising meat is when you slow cook meat in oil with vegetables for over a long period of time. Is that how you define it? What tell us what braising meat is.
You mix it two. One is braised, one's a confit. Cooking it slowly in its own fat, that's called confit. It's delicious. And also braised means basically you're slowly caramelizing the meat outside, sealing the meat, and then with the broth and vegetables and spices, you are slowly cooking for a long period of time, because meat has muscles. So you want to break the meat slowly if those muscles become tender, and that's a slow cook and long period.
Okay, so now is there a Iranian style of braising meat, or is there a particular Iranian style, and if so, how is that done?
Absolutely. The Iranian style called gourmet. Gourmet is deriving word from Turkish word from gourmak. Gourmak means, literally means frying. And the reason they used to do that one as essential that Jian Ghomeshi by jackpot, all days they didn't have the meat, keep it in the refrigerator fresh, so they had to braise it in the basically oil and fat, cure it, and keep it for the longer, for the winter especially. And that was a particular, and the reason Iranian braising is different because there's no spice or herb used for this technique, so it can have a multi-usage for any kind of dishes in the future, for stews, for ground, everything you want to use you can, because there's no flavor added at the braising. But the new techniques we use in the kitchen, like a French or in my kitchen, we braise the meat like lamb shank, particular for dish what we're gonna serve. So after that, we cannot serve that one with another kind.
Can you just tell me again? Because sometimes I don't quite understand these things. So why does braising the meat make it last longer?
You are curing the meat basically with its own fat and salt added. So you are protecting the meat from getting spoiled and keeping it in a cool area.
Oh. And what are there advantages of braising meat besides the fact that it lasts longer?
It's on the long run, it makes it that, like, again, when you braise the meat, you're tenderizing the meat, slowly cooking, so it becomes like a fall apart and also lasts longer. And again, it was a method of the old-fashioned, even other countries, they braise the meat and cure the meat for stay longer, and they can use it in the winter when they had harsh days.
So is there I guess the question is in terms of the Iranian style, or what you're teaching us today and what you're going to teach in that video that we'll post at our site, roqemedia.com, and on our Telegram channel. Do you have a technique, the way we do this, and that speeds up the cooking time? Because, of course, the one sort of flag on the play here is that it's going to take a long time to do this. That's the whole notion is to do it over time, right? So what kind of useful technique do you have in terms of speeding it up?
Yeah, basically you take the meat, cut it small pieces, with bone or without bone, doesn't matter, and you are cooking in the hot boiled water. So that's actually in the first step, you are cooking it with the hot water boiling. You're taking care of the bacteria might be outside the meat. So basically, you are making the meat safe, and also about half an hour you cook time. So that's kind of, you don't want to cook all the way. You cook it, and after that you strain the meat.
So you get rid of the calf. You don't want to keep that, right?
Exactly. You strain, yeah, exactly. Okay. And then after that, when you strain the meat from the broth, we will talk about broth later, what they use for it. But for the meat, they take another pot with the animal fat, or sometimes they use the tail of the lamb, or if you don't like it, you can use regular, like a G for it, and you are caramelizing, and you are giving it a little color, but you don't want to overcook it because it crumbles. And then after that, let it cool, and when you put in the ceramic or the clay pots, you want to make sure top of it's fat, so that seals the meat from the protect the meat from the getting spoiled or bacteria. And you can keep that one in the cool area, which is in the old days, every household, they have an underground called ambari or sardabe. It was particularly made like an old school yakhjal, homemade, to keep this for the winters.
It's like a cellar, right?
Yes, they're like exactly like a cellar, exactly.
Okay, well, and what are we going to see exactly on this video?
On the video, I am taking the audience step by step how to cook them in the boiling water and separate it, and explaining them how they can braise in the timing, and how they can keep it, especially we don't need anymore to keep it for winter, but even this meat in the refrigerator can last for as long as you want it. It is as long as you don't penetrate the top part of the fat, it stays longer. But the moment you touch it, then you have to use it like a maximum 10 week or 10 days. Can
I ask you? So if I buy some meat, and I know that I'm not going to have time. I know that I'm not going to eat it right away. So I'm buying it for the future. Does it make sense to put that meat in the refrigerator, in the freezer now, or to braise it and put it in the freezer?
Great question. Braising is better because you are respecting the flavor, keeping the flavor. But if you put a freezer, anytime you put the meat in the freezer, you lose the quality of the flavors. I won't recommend the freezing the meat, especially like steak, like a lamb shank.
So those people who you go buy in bulk a bunch of meat from Costco, and put it in the freezer, you're saying it actually makes sense to braise it first before you do that.
Actually prevent from buying a frozen product unless it's the lamb shank is okay. Hind shank, lamb shank is okay. But when you go to steak, ribeye steak, New York steak, if it's frozen, the flavor is 50-80% is gone. I won't recommend it. It has to be a fresh one. Yes, exactly.
I will never freeze again. That's it. That's the end of that.
You can actually the best way to experiment it. Like it will have one fresh piece, one frozen, defrost it, and also when you defrost the meat, you are jeopardizing the quality and also exposure for the bacteria. You might even get sick. That's another problem when you have to concern when you have a defrost in the.
No, it's just a convenience thing. I mean, obviously the meat from the butcher is better, but if you can't keep running to the butcher, you want to buy some meat and put it in the freezer or something. But this is very instructive to know that you lose. I mean, if you lose that much of the taste, it really isn't worth it, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's fair to say, I suppose, that back then they did it to prevent the meat from spoiling. Now you do it more so to preserve the taste and flavor of it, right?
And also they used to do that one in the summer or middle of the fall, like the whole family household. They used to take, depends on how many people live in, 1 or 2 whole animals. they used to butcher it and cook the whole thing. So in the winter, all they have to do when they're cooking, just rather than cooking 2-3 hours this meat, they had like about warm it up, add it to their ashes, soups, or stews, or anything they want to use it. So it was a practical, quick meal. Make it with this the braised meat.
Isn't it funny that this ancient tactic actually is better than the modern way of freezing meat? That to
That's
me
crazy.
is pretty cool.
I know.
Absolutely, great point, Kianjan.
What I want to know, chef, is that in terms of taste, like if I'm cooking stew with fresh meat, in terms of taste, would it be different if I were to braise the meat and then cook my stew with it, or no?
Yes, because you have the flavor stays there. But in this case, you are, I know the juice comes, you're cooking for 20-30 minutes at the beginning of the boiling water, but you can use that one, we call that one eshkane. And you can use it for the family or old days, because when they cook this, braise this meat, the smell was so good, the whole neighborhood could have smelled it. So what they used to do, when they take this broth and add few small pieces of the meat, braise the meat to it, and pass it on the neighbors to share the love.
Chef Haas, I thank you. By the way, is it more effective to braise meat with Shaya's jazz music on piano behind you, or without?
To answer your question, I cannot cook if there's not music playing background. Music is basically, I cook, but music is the food for my soul.
Love
Beautifully said. Chef Haas, thank you. We look forward to seeing your video, and look forward to talking again next week, brother.
It's always a pleasure to be a great crew of the Roqe.
Thanks,
Bye,
chef.
bye.
Bye.
Chef Hoss-pitality in San Francisco with Hoss-pitality. So you can see his latest video, in this case, how to braise meat Iranian style, at roqemedia.com. Our website, it'll be there right on the front page there. Or our Telegram channel. It's also available there. Our Telegram channel is Roqe Media. All right. I said I would do this before the end of the show. I want to thank some of the BFFs, some of the folks who've been so kind to become patrons at Roqe. And I'm going to do these names with Shaya looking at me, because you're going to correct me on some of these names, because these are for one of the. I'm looking at the list. I'll just do a few on this show. We'll parcel it out over a few shows. So before we go, thank you to Vadaram.
I have no clue.
Varahram. Vadaram.
Oh, that sounds about...
Vadaram Hemati, Muhammad Hejivandi, Nick Zahiri, Mahmoud Roshandel, and Olga Muharti.
Again, I
Shai, you've been no help. Please play some music underneath me when I do this next time, so I can braise meat and say these names.
Oh, boy.
This is full time for Roqe for today. Thank you to those folks and to everybody who is supporting us and sharing our content and becoming patrons. You can do so by going to the Support Us button at our website, roqemedia.com, where you can see all of our episodes, all of our content, links to all of our platforms, and the latest video from Chef Haas. Thanks to the amazing team who put this show together each week: producer Susan, Ponta the artist, Thoughtful Degin, the fabulous Keon, Chef Haas, Savi Roham, Aghay Mehdad, Master Muhammad, Captain Reza, and Groovy Shaya. Thank you again to all of you out there supporting us and telling people about our content. Please subscribe on any of our platforms if you've not done so already. And you can find me on Instagram at Jian Ghomeshi. Thank you. And as ever, please, Mizun Bashir.